I'm going to be talking to you all about some basic principles of leadership. Now, I understand that leadership, talking about the principles of leadership, can be a huge topic, and it's not something we can cover in like a few hours or a few minutes. So, what I'm going to do is share with you some of the really basic points, the principles that I've seen that really make a practical sense towards all leaders. Now, I'm assuming that all of you either are leaders or at least you aspire to be leaders in some area. It could be in profession, it could be in personal leadership in terms of your own life, and of course, all of us are leaders when it comes to our families. So, all of these principles that we talk about tend to work with all of these, whether it's in business, whether it's in personal life, whether it's in a social environment when you're trying to do something for society. So I've picked, kind of cherry picked a bunch of leaders from both the social framework, from business, from the military, and I've tried to put together their ideas about what works for them. So I'm going to be sharing that with you. I'm also working on turning these principles into a small book. It's kind of a handbook that should be out. It was supposed to be out by the end of this year, but with lockdown and everything else going on, I don't know when it's going to come out. When it does come out, hopefully you guys will enjoy that part too. So having said that, let me share with you the slide presentation that I've created for this, which is on your screens now. And as you can see, most people choose images of either people or lions or something. I've chosen a pack of wolves. And hopefully by the time I'm done with this, you'll have an idea about why I've chosen wolves. Now, wolves are a very interesting pack of animals. Not only do they have a very bad reputation as being mean or very, very combative, and all of it is true. They can be really mean, they can be very combative, but it doesn't mean that they are combative or mean with each other. They understand what their pack is, and they know who are the people within their pack, and they work tirelessly to preserve this pack. So there's a lot of things we can learn from them as well, as we can from any other thing in nature. But more than that, it's about first defining what we mean by leadership ourselves. I mean, there needs to be some sort of definition. If you can't define something, you can't master it. So here's a definition that I like to work with, which is leadership is not just an art, it's not just a craft, it's also a science and a big part of science. So the art is about mastering the art of relationships, the complicated interactions that happen between people. In a sense, it's about understanding and handling group dynamics and how well you handle those group dynamics. The craft part of it is about practice, 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 and more practice. Because unless you practice enough, you don't get to create an environment where things can work. So we learn from past leaders, we learn from our own mistakes, and we learn from some things which we are trying to create as opportunities. And like we said, the more you practice, the luckier you tend to get. Now, this is a fantastic phrase that's been said by multiple sports people, and we really don't know where this phrase comes from right in the beginning. But it really does make sense. So I've heard Michael Jordan talk about it, Ani Plummer talk about it, Virat Kohli has talked about it, Dhoni used to talk about it, Tendulkar, you name it. So practice is the most important part. And the reason we practice is so we can create an environment where people can perform. And finally, we talk about the science. And it's the science of communicating a vision that will inspire people. Ability to communicate in simple terms and tell them what is it that's going to get them there. Never stop learning is basically the key part of this science. So I've been talked about this definition, if you want to came, or more like a framework about leadership being art and craft and science. Let's look at what are some of the principles of leadership that we're trying to talk about. Now, whether you agree on anything else or not, you've got to agree to the fact that whenever there's a group of people trying to do something, the leader will definitely have a disproportionate impact on the results that you get. In a sense, what I'm saying is that the captain of the team has a huge impact on the morale, on the motivation, and how well the team wants to perform. So if you look at a bunch of leaders, and I've just chosen a random sample of leaders who are the images in front of you, I don't think you need to define or tell their names. You can recognize them at a glance. What I did was sandwich them between the two opposite frames. On one side, you've got a Gandhi. On the other side, you've got a Hitler. Now, you may or may not like them, but the fact remains that both of them were leaders and both of them had a disproportionate impact on the results of the people they led. So if Gandhi decided to take a particular path, Hitler chose the exact opposite path. However, while they lasted, while they worked, while their influence as leaders prevailed, the impact they had on the people was huge. So, what are these principles that all of these people tend to follow? Here are 8 of them that I think really work. And these are the ones I've identified for the purpose of this conversation. Also, like I said, for the purpose of the book that I'm working on. So, first, having a purpose, having a clear vision, taking ownership, authenticity. Now, I know authenticity is something we talk about all the time. Who's an authentic leader, who's not? We'll discuss that part as well. Humility is one of the key ones. Most leaders have a sense of humility. Now, I can see a lot of you thinking, how come this guy is talking about humility and Hitler in the same phrase? Well, don't look at Hitler at the end of his career, by which time he was a completely bigoted fanatic. Think about Hitler when he started in his career as an emerging leader. And that is a point, if you guys check your history books, you'll realize he was actually the embodiment of humility. Of course, it went to his head later on, but that's not the point. Once he lost that humility, we also know what happened to him. The flexibility part of it, being able to explore options, look beyond yourself. Emotional intelligence, another huge one. And the key one, I think, which is respect, not just for yourself, not just for your team, but crucially, respect for your opponents or for the people you are fighting against, your competition, if you want to call it. So these are some of the key things that we look at. So I'm going to now take you through each of these 8 principles. The way I've thought about this is that I'll talk a little bit about each principle, and I'll ask you 3 questions which you can ask yourself. So when I put up those 3 questions for you, it might be a good idea for you to take a screenshot, to take some notes, and back when you're finished with the session, when you're on your own time, try to answer each of those questions yourself and see where those take you. All right, so that said, let me get started with the first part of it, which is the purpose. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard of this gentleman called Viktor Frankl, but he wrote a very interesting and a very impactful book. It's a small book, but extremely impactful, and it's called Man's Search for Meaning. Once we're done with the session, if you're the reading kind, do try to go onto Amazon, buy the book or something. You could even find some summaries of it online, but it's great. Viktor Frankl was a very interesting character. He was a Jew in Nazi Germany, and he was put inside Auschwitz prison, which is, you know, the horror chamber of the worst that the Nazis were all about. And he actually survived it. But it was not what his journey of survival, but what he learned while he was surviving through those horrendous moments. He realized that there were 2 kinds of people. There were the one kind of people who gave up and died, and the other kind of people who, no matter what people threw at them, what kind of tensions came, what kind of problems they had to go through, no food, no sleep, but they still survived. And he found that it was the purpose. Anyone had a purpose in life, they were able to survive that. So he came up with this concept of positive psychology, and he talks about saying that a leader's purpose is essentially to make the world a better place by serving others. Now, this may sound like a very grand thing to say, but if you think about it, it really is exactly what a leader does. So yes, a leader may make a lot of name, fame, fortune for himself or herself, but that can only happen when she is helping the world make a better place, or at least the team which is there, which is working with them, should have something which is making them better. So some of the questions that I would like you to ask yourself is, first, what does your business or team exist for? What's the purpose of the existence? Now, Steve Jobs famously said that I want to create a dent in the universe. That's the purpose of my existence. Sounds a bit vague. Let's look at Bill Gates. He defined his purpose very clearly. He said, I want to put a computer on every desk in the country across the world. Now, when you think about that as a purpose, it just gives a huge meaning to what you're doing. And one man has a meaning. When you find what is the meaning of your life, you're welcome, you're willing to fight through everything. Now, we are dealing with a very strange situation with COVID around the world. And when it first hit, we laughed at it and said, hey, this is fun. And then we realized this is a lot of seriousness. We are working from home. And a lot of people I know have actually found it very, very challenging. Some people have adapted beautifully to it. And I think what they found is the difference between the people who've adapted, the ones who've not adapted, is the ones who've been able to connect their work or the challenge that they've got with the meaning it will get for you. So we've got a lot of people who've gone online, people who've made fortunes, and the other people who are still cursing themselves and saying, what happened to me? So ask yourself, Why does your business, your team, your family, why do you exist? How does your team, how does your family, how do you self, what can you do to make the world a better place? And critically, what do you want to be remembered for? Now, these three questions, I've framed them in the framework of business, but you could well adapt them to yourself and say, let me ask this question of myself. So, like I said, take a screenshot of this, think about this, and look at these three questions from your own perspective. Now, while you're doing this, let me talk to you a little bit more about Viktor Frankl and what are some of the things he discovered in that horrendous atmosphere inside. He realized that most of the time people are going along well, they're dealing with the situations, the more hardship comes on them, they learn to adjust, they learn to adapt, and they keep on going on. But at some point, some people will give up. And he noticed that the first people who were about to die or about to commit suicide or just give up used to pick up all of their cigarettes and smoke them all up. Now, that's the only thing they had. But essentially what you're doing is you're saying, I've had it, I'm burning through all my resources right now, I don't really care for tomorrow. Now, that's a deep, profound thing to think about, because it's essentially saying that unless a human being can think about tomorrow, there is no purpose, there is no meaning. And if you can't do that, you can't lead. You may very well be a follower, but if you want to be a leader, you need to know these three questions. You need to be able to answer them in a flash. All right? So that's principle number one. Really short and sweet, but very, very critical. And that's why, of course, I've put it at number one. Come to the second one. And this is something you've all heard about many times. You know, people talk about what is the vision. Now, it's possibly one of the most overrated, overused, misused terminologies along with strategy, because it really doesn't mean anything. So what's a vision? Or is it something you can envision? Is it something you can imagine? What's going on with that? So it doesn't really matter what your vision is. What is more important is the ability you have to be able to articulate that vision so that people can actually understand what you're trying to say and draw meaning from it. So if you can't clearly articulate what you're doing, it's the biggest demoralizing factor that can happen to you. You may have the best team in the world, but if you can't tell them where they're going, they have nothing to do. Now, this is something I've experienced myself. At one point in my life, I decided to start off a business with a very interesting, what I thought was a very different and radical way of doing things. I said, let's get a bunch of really smart people together who don't need a leader. Let's just have them together as a cohort, and let's each help each other to be able to drive ourselves onto better things and bigger things. Worked beautifully for the first 6 months. And then I found people coming to me one by one and saying, okay, so what's our vision? And I was fighting back with them and saying, look, I'm not the leader. I don't want to be a leader. So I don't have a vision. You tell me what's your vision. As you can imagine, the team didn't last. It broke up. This entire beautiful idea of mine didn't last more than 6 months. Because I realized later that I can't just pass up on that leadership thing. I can't force people to be leaders. I needed to have something which was a vision, which was much more than just saying, let's work together to do something. I needed to articulate what that something was. So I learned that lesson. And the next time I set up something on very, very similar lines, I created a very clear vision in my mind. I did what is the common thing to do, have an offsite, get people together, share my vision, ask them to buy in their points. And that really worked. And that's what helped me reach where I am right now. So that's the second part of it. Vision is also something which is sometimes people don't really understand it in a sense about how can you look that far ahead. So two kinds of mistakes happen. Either your vision is too short term, or it becomes such a long term, such a broad thing that people just can't relate to it. The biggest thing which I find is people start saying, okay, this is what I want to do. I need to articulate every step. No, you don't. You just need to know where you're going and take the first step. But the best story which I can share with you around this as an example is something which is a genuine thing which happened in the United States of America. So when the country was being built, when they started putting highways across this, the huge nation of theirs, they were trying to figure out what would be the best way to create highways. What's the shortest distance between the two cities? Obviously, logically, it sounds like it's a straight line. But we know it's not really always there because there are hills, there are rivers, there are kinds of terrain that you have to traverse. So they did an aerial survey of the whole thing. And when the experts came back, they realized that most of the best highways were already marked. And they were already marked by the wild animals that used to go from one part of the country to the other during their winter migration. So these animals didn't have helicopters, they didn't have long-term visions or whatever, anything else. They just knew one thing, that if I stay here, I'm going to starve and die. I need to find fresh food, water, a better climate. So they used to start moving in a direction. And as they went in the direction, every obstacle that came along the way was dealt with in the moment. And by doing that step by step, they eventually reached where they were supposed to reach. Now, I think that's the best analogy for achieving your vision. So you know what you want to do, and you put up the steps. Now, simple joke, it says, how do you climb Mount Everest? One step at a time. And that's the vision which you have. Mount Everest is your vision. You want to get up there. You're not going to fly there. You've got to do it one step at a time. And each step, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be really, really hard. So don't think it's easy, but be prepared for it. Remember, as Jack Welch said, create a vision, articulate the vision, and passionately own the vision. And finally, be relentless when you're driving it to completion. Beautiful quote, really love that. So here are the 3 questions for yourself. Can you tell a compelling story of the future? And what would be the compelling story for the future? Can you show your people what your vision looks like, sounds like, feels like? And can you present your vision in a way that seems achievable, a very clear way forward, just a few steps? If you can't do these 3 things, you will never be able to encourage people or inspire them to get through. So that's the second one, linked very closely, like I said, with meaning, because first we need to have a purpose and a meaning, and that meaningful thing should be linked with a vision that we want for the future. Third principle, the biggest one, is about ownership. Now, I'm using the phrase 100%, and 100% of the ownership rests with the leader. You can't blame anyone. The buck absolutely stops with you when it comes to any mistake. Any victory, any win is always passed on to the team. But anything that goes wrong, it's your fault. If you can't take that attitude, if you don't have the courage to take that weight on your shoulders, forget about being leaders. It's not going to work. It's very, very tempting to tell people that, hey, it's your fault or something happened, COVID happened, the politicians did something wrong, whatever the hell. But it's ultimately up to you to be able to take that burden, no matter how unfairly it's placed upon you, and drive it to fruition. So it's difficult, but if you can do it, like we say, the people will go to hell and back for you, they will walk on fire for you, they will do what it takes. But you've got to be willing to step up and take that ownership. Again, a little personal story I'd like to share with you on this. This was when I opened my first office. Now, before that, I had a nice, lovely team of people who used to help me. If I needed something, all I had to do was call HR or admin or someone, and someone would take care of things. So I started my own business, and when you start your own business, you realize money is important, and you do your own thing. So you try to minimize on all the cost. So one day I went into my office in Gurgaon, and as often happens, there was no electricity. So I said, hey, let's turn on the generator. So there's me and the guard. We turn on the generator, guard comes and says, no diesel, sir. So my car had already gone to the service center. I had to hop into an auto with a jerry can, go to the petrol station, fill up 2 jerry cans with diesel, come in, fill in the diesel cans myself into the generator and start it. Lesson I learned was, no one else is going to do it for you. You've got to do it yourself. Now, the Navy SEALs in the US have a beautiful term for it. They call it extreme ownership. It's not just about ownership, but it's about extreme ownership. And the way it works for them is that everyone takes 100% accountability for anything that goes wrong. So once everyone, starting with you, is taking 100% ownership for everything that has gone wrong, then there is nothing to blame, nothing to pass on. So the leaders will take the blame and they will pass on the credit to their team. Like I said, hard to do, but something which you must learn to do. All right? 3 questions for yourself. Can you step up to accept the big challenges? If you think you can, write down 3 things that you've done, 3 big challenges, things that were not directly your fault, but you still took ownership for them. If you've never done that, there's a lot of gaps to cover. Hold other people accountable, definitely, but don't blame them. It's not saying that, okay, fine, I've taken the blame on myself and you're free to go and do what you want. No. I will hold the other person accountable. We will point out to them, we will discuss to them what went wrong, but I'm not blaming them. Give them a chance to make better for their mistakes. But at the same time, make sure that you hold them accountable. If the other person is unwilling to take accountability, guess what? They shouldn't be on your team. If you are unwilling to take accountability, you shouldn't be on your team. So accept your mistake and do whatever it takes to fix them. This is the third one and the biggest one. Ask yourself, when you've made a mistake, have you accepted it openly, directly? And then have you gone out of your way to do whatever it takes to fix that? Now, if you look around you in the world today, and not just India, There's a lot of mistakes that have been made with the way COVID has been dealt with. But not one politician has actually put up their hand saying that I made this mistake and I'm willing to do something to fix it. All everyone is trying to do is cover their ass and say, no, 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 theek tha, I did the right thing. So I'm not just talking about the US or India, I'm talking about all the countries in the world. And here's a big problem, because it means we don't have in today's at least political global world, leaders who are willing to accept their mistakes and hold themselves accountable. Big problem. The good news is that I've seen a lot of people in business doing this. So whether it's an Elon Musk, whether it's a Jeff Bezos, whether it's any of the big names you can think of, everyone's gone through the big problems, big challenges, but they've taken accountability. Very few of them have tried to pass on the blame to the government or to COVID-19 or to China or whatever. They figure out how to make it work. I have a lovely set of clients who I work with, and the best of my clients have actually not just not cut people's salaries, but in some cases they've actually still giving them bonuses this year. Now the bonus may not be huge. It may just be a token bonus, but imagine the motivation that it charges the team with when they know that even in a situation like this, my job is not at risk, my bonus is not at risk. So accept your mistakes and do what it takes to fix them. Principle 4, my favorite one, authenticity. Do you have the courage to pull your face off and look at yourself really hard? It's like almost like a face-off situation. Hence, I chose that lovely picture of mine. Authentic leaders will always provide a very genuine picture of who he or she is. They don't try to hide behind anything. They look at themselves and they understand what they're all about. Now, if you look at Virat Kohli, for example, great example, by nature, this guy is an aggressive person. Now imagine if Virat Kohli tries to act in a very gentle, calm, collected, Dhoni kind of manner. It's not going to work for him because that's not who he is. He may try to do it, and the more he tries to act in that way, that sense of stress that comes from trying to be someone else will play on you, and at some point you'll explode. Dhoni is Dhoni. That's the way he is. He's Captain Cool, not because he's Captain Cool, but because he's a calm, centered guy. Virat Kohli is someone who's a passionate, on my sleeve kind of person, and he's got to be like that. So you can't hide that part. Look at the strength that you have and play from it. So to do that, first thing you've got to be very clear on is what are your core values and beliefs. If you look at Dhoni, his core values or beliefs, and we are just guessing this, we don't know him, might be that I've got to keep a sense of calm and control. I will not lose control. In Kohli's case, it's about I need to win at any cost, and that shows in the attitudes. So knowing who you are and who I am not is very important, because your values are what's going to drive your behavior. So obviously, the 3 questions I'm going to ask you to look for yourself is 1, what are your core values? What are your behavior patterns? Because if you can understand your behavior patterns, your core values will automatically emerge from those core values. Now, when I mean behavior patterns, you will notice certain things that you tend to do often or probably every time. Now, in my case, let me use that example so maybe you can relate to it. Usually, I like to believe that I'm a calm, collected sort of person, but I know there are moments when I lose it. One of the silliest things that happen is if I'm in Gurgaon or Delhi or I'm driving somewhere and I go to park my car in the mall, and you might have noticed this happening. Once you've parked your car really perfectly and you've kind of switched off your engine, you're getting out of the car, a parking attendant will come up to you and say, "Sir, please move your car 5 inches to the other side." Now that's the moment at which I lose my cool. And I just feel like, getting violent with the person who's screaming, shouting, doing something. And I need to understand, why is this a repeated behavior pattern with me? So I'm not going to tell you why I think this is my repeated behavior pattern. The reason I shared this story was for you to be able to think about understanding what might be your behavior patterns. What are some of the things that you tend to fall into? It could be a repetitive argument with your spouse. It could be about someone misses a deadline and you get upset. It could be anything which related to a client behavior. Any of those things could be one of your behavior patterns. So understanding your weak spots, your sources of anxiety, personal fears will help you understand what these are. And once you've got them in place, realize that you can turn them into strength. So yes, you get angry very often. Fantastic. Don't think about it as anger. Think about anger as a source of energy for you, and channelize that anger into the right area, which is what we see all the great leaders doing. The 5th point, humility. As the leader, you must be able to demonstrate humility. It's not okay to be humble yourself. You've got to show humility. And a very simple way of showing humility is to show gratitude. Please, thank you, respecting other people. When I talk to someone, maintain eye contact rather than pick up my phone and start looking at that. All of these kind of things are important. I've seen so many times when a meeting is happening, a manager is talking to his team, he's also on the phone or he's looking at his phone. Something is going on. You're not even maintaining eye contact with me. How do I feel respected? So the act of being humble demonstrates that you care more about your people than you care about your own success. It's only when you care about your people's success that your business can grow. If I think about this in terms of family, if I can't show my family that they mean more to me than then obviously my family is not going to be very happy with me. So humility is a huge thing. And it starts at very basic level. From that parking attendant we talked about, to the domestic help in your house. How do you talk to them? Do you even look at them? Do you wish them good morning? Are you just abusive with them? It's a sign. It's an act of confidence. It's not weakness to ask for help. So be willing to be humble. If you don't know something, say you don't know it. Here are 3 questions for you. When was the last time you said, I don't know this? Because most of us are so busy trying to prove ourselves competent that we just hate to accept that I don't know something. I can't tell you the number of countless times I've had people in my team come up to me. I say, here's what we need to do. The person hasn't understood or they don't know how to do it, but they'll never tell me that I don't know how to do this. They will try and go and find it out themselves. I appreciate that. Fantastic. Try it. But if you can't get it, ask someone. Now, asking someone for help is a beautiful thing and it's a very powerful tool. Let me share you another story. And this is again something which a friend of mine taught me. Now, this friend of mine he's living in the US right now. He's young. He's one of the youngest app developers. And before this COVID thing started, he was developing an app for monitoring prenatal health of the child. That means when the child in its mother's womb, how can we know how healthy it is or not? Now, he comes from a family of doctors. And during one of our conversations, I just asked this young guy, how did you become a doctor? He said, it's a family thing. My grandfather was a doctor. And how did he become a doctor? He says, my grandfather used to work in Delhi. He was a refugee who came back from Pakistan after the partition. And he used to work in a shop as a helper. And he was just walking around, working in the shop, and he noticed a customer come in one day and buy a lot of things, drive a fancy car. So he asked the customer very courageously, he said, sir, what do you do? So the guy said, I'm a doctor. He says, my grandfather started thinking I need to be a doctor. Now, to be a doctor at that time, he calculated stuff that if I work and I keep on earning money, etc., I'll need to have 5 rupees in a month. 5 rupees back then we are talking about was a decent amount of money. So he found out who's the richest man in India, and someone told him Mr. Birla is a very rich guy. So he wrote a postcard to Mr. Birla saying, here's my name, here's what I do. If you were to give me 5 rupees a month, I will become a doctor. Now, some quirk of fate, whatever happened, that letter reached Mr. Birla's office, and Mr. Birla started sending him money orders for 5 rupees a month. He used that money, became a doctor, and the rest is history. And all because he had the courage to ask for help, the humility to say, I need something. So do we really need to be in the position of a really poor, impoverished person on the street before we ask for help? Or can we ask for help from a position of strength? Do you think people like Gandhi, do you think people like Elon Musk, do you think people like Dhoni don't ask for help? They do. And that's one of the big things, because they put their ego down and say, I don't know. So ask someone for help with something. And write down these 3 questions. The third one being, when was the last time you demonstrated vulnerability or admitted that you don't know or you're scared to your team or someone? Exposing your weakness is a huge thing, and it builds your humility. 6, flexibility. Now, I can't speak enough about flexibility. It's about continuously refining your approach, changing it, reinventing yourself every day. If you can't reinvent yourself, if you don't learn from your mistakes and keep changing, then what are you all about anyways? Because as a human being, you need to learn, change, and grow. Now let's look at one of our favorite business heroes of the modern world, which is the late Steve Jobs. Now Jobs, as you know, was actually a genius who was fired from his own company. He was leading Mac and he was pushing it into the ground. When there was this huge coup, the takeover, the board of directors ignominiously chucked him out of his own country, and he was out on the streets. And he was really, really upset, and he was really mad about what had happened to him. But he learned that. He learned that lesson from it. He set up another company. He set up Next. He set up Pixar. And it reached a stage when he was finally called back again to head his own company. And when he came back, it was a very different Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs version 1 used to be the hard driving man who used to say, I'm working for 48 hours. How dare you go home to your wife and child? Your wife and child are not important. Apple is. If Apple is not the number one thing in your life, you don't belong here. That was the attitude he had. And people used to love him for it, but used to also hate him for it. It kept on going for a while, but when things get rough, people can't handle that anymore and they keep on leaving. Or they start hating you. Once they start hating you, they stop respecting you. They stop respecting you, they start supporting you. And that's it. When Steve Jobs version 2 came back, he was a kinder, gentler Steve Jobs. He used to actually get people together, have offsites, allow them to speak. Now I'd encourage you to go through YouTube and you'll find lots of videos of Steve Jobs earlier in his offsite. When he's the guy standing up and speaking, everyone else is sitting and listening. And Steve Jobs version 2, when he's sitting in a circle with all of them, literally on the ground, and listening to them rather than telling them what to do. So he's a great guy who learned from his mistake and kept changing. Now remember, he didn't have to do this. He had been fired from his company, yes, but he'd set up 2 more companies which were hugely successful. He was still making millions. He didn't have to come back and be humble or flexible, but he did both. He learned from his mistakes and he kept changing. And he kept changing till the last day of his life. So when was the last time you changed a part of your routine? Get used to being uncomfortable. If you can't even change a simple routine in your life, let's say one of the routines is, I spend 3 hours a day watching Netflix because I've got nothing else to do. Can you stop Netflix and read a book instead? Or maybe you're the kind of person who reads books all the time. You're feeling very happy. Yay, I read books. Can you stop reading books and start writing something? Change anything. But unless you get used to being uncomfortable, you're never going to learn the art of flexibility. It could be learning a new language. It could be learning to play an instrument. Do something you're not comfortable with. Get into the kitchen and cook. Take over your wife's duties for once and start doing them. Do something different. Anything that makes you uncomfortable. Do it until you get used to it, until it becomes a comfortable thing. And you'll realize that your flexibility keeps expanding. Finally, play devil's advocate. Now, this is something I love to do with myself, and I do it with my team. Of course, I'm great at that. So whenever I do something, I question my own mistake. This is something which we have in our company, which we call war games. So when I say war game, essentially it's a term we've borrowed from the military. When the military is practicing for a war, for example, right now we've got this conflict going on with China, and I'm sure the Indian Army at some point or the other is doing these war games routine, where team A will play India, team B or the red team will play China. And we don't know what they're doing, but team A will say, I'm doing this, and then Chinese guys will do something else, and these guys will do something, and the Chinese guys will do something else. You're trying to question yourself and try to find holes in your own pattern of existence. What are the mistakes I'm making? When we do business strategy sessions with our clients, we use war games too. What we try to do is get people to say, what's your plan? So the top team will come in, they will present their plan and say, here's what we want to do. And we pick and choose people from the lower levels, people who are out on the streets, who are selling the product, people from middle management, and we pick the people who are not afraid to ask questions. We get them to play the competition. So if team A, for example, is Vodafone, team B will be Reliance. So they'll play a game against each other. Vodafone will put out a particular product in the market, and the guys from Reliance will put out a counter product for it. See what happens. Sometimes the best idea that you have may not be such a great idea after all. So learn to play devil's advocate. If you can't do it yourself, get someone else to do it for you. But again, make sure that you build that flexibility. 7th, emotional intelligence. Probably the most vital tool in any leader's key toolkit. And also the most misunderstood. Now, I've heard so many people come up to me and say, EQ or emotional intelligence is about being nice. No, it's not about being nice at all, sir. You've heard the phrase that says, nice guys finish last. I don't know if that's true or not, but I can tell you this. Leaders are not nice people. They don't have to be nice. They just have to be respectful. What we are talking about emotional energy is realizing that all your energy comes from emotions. It doesn't come from anywhere else. I'm sure all of you, or maybe a lot of you, watch some sports on television. Now imagine your favorite sport, whether it's football or cricket or something, and your team is playing against the team you hate most. If it's cricket, it's India versus Pakistan. Or maybe it's, if you're a football fan, India doesn't really get to the World Cup, but It could be Brazil playing against Germany or something. So your team wins, and suddenly you're sitting in front of a television, but you've got this burst of energy, you're charged up, and you can go and kill. When India won the World Cup, bunch of people came into their cars, honking their horns and driving on the streets, celebrating. Mrs. Sonia Gandhi also reached on India Gate. Where is that energy coming from? It's coming from your emotions. Now imagine if your team loses, what happens? Huge depression. Suddenly all that energy is gone. Kya ho gaya yaar, I'm dead. People will sit down, start sulking. You lose it. So your energy comes from your emotions. So when we talk about emotional intelligence, we are talking about self-control. It's about channelizing your energies, understanding which emotion gives you that charge and how to channelize that into achieving your purpose. So ask yourself these three questions again. Can you identify what are your high energy emotions? For most people, these will be anger, getting frustrated, because these are the high energy things. You can't get angry without energy. If you're feeling very calm and mellow, then obviously it's not a high energy thing. So you've got to find a way to channelize that high energy into a positive direction. Anger, huge energy. Channelize it in the right direction, massive boost. It's like a rocket full fuel for you. So key is, before you react, analyze the impact of what you're doing. All right? Finally, we come to the last part, or the cornerstone of leadership, which is respect. Now, you can't get respect without showing respect. If you don't give respect to anyone else, no one else is going to give it to you. Now, any leader who is not able to respect his followers or other people is nothing more than a tyrant. Now, you understand what tyrants are. Tyrants are what Hitler became at the end of his career. He didn't start that way, but that's how he ended up. For a lot of people, Gandhiji also ended up as a tyrant. That's why someone killed him. For some reason or the other, people believe that they're not being respected. Now, Gandhiji is a classic example which proves you can never make everyone happy. You may be the best person in the world, you may be a Mahatma, you may be a saint, but there'll still be people who are willing to shoot you. That's the cost of leadership, and you've got to live with it. If you're not willing to commit yourself and be willing to pay the price, leadership is not for you. Remember, bosses are never trusted or rarely trusted, and very rarely do you respect your bosses. If you respect your boss, you can be guaranteed one thing, that boss is at least on the way to being a leader or is genuinely a true leader. Because the leaders are the ones we trust and respect. We don't respect and trust bosses. Bosses rule with authority, with pressure. Leaders rule with impassioned, inspired visions. So these are the 8 principles. And the 3 questions for you from respect, a perspective of respect, is to ask, what can you learn from your competitors today? Your competitors can be your colleagues. Hopefully, you're not looking at them as competition. They can be your competitors in business. They could be people who are doing better than you in any way. But can you learn from them? What are the areas in which they do better than you and why? Don't envy their success. Find out why they're better than you and try to copy that. Emulate it. I know a lot of people who say, man, I don't have enough time in the world. I say, I have the same 24 hours that you do. The difference between you and me is that you spend your weekends binge watching Money Heist or something on Netflix. I spend my weekends actually trying to get something done. Yep. So, in a nutshell, those were the 7 or the 8 principles of leadership that we talked about. Before I end, let me just come back to my 2 favorite leaders again and try to understand why is it that one of them is hated, one of them is not. Because leaders are expected to deliver results. And if you look at both of these people, only one of these people managed to deliver the results they promised. Is it likely that if Gandhiji had failed in his mission, he would not have been known as the father of the nation? Absolutely. What would have happened if Hitler had won the war? Would we all have been doing Nazi salutes right now? Quite likely. But that's not the point. History is not going to judge you by only the results that you deliver. It's also going to look at you and say how you made those results happen. So whether Gandhiji had won or lost, whether we got the freedom from the British as a result of his efforts or not, he would still have been respected as being a man of peace, as being a man who cared. Hitler, probably not. He might have become the ruler of the world, but he would have ended up as a tyrant. We would have saluted, but we would have never secretly hated him, as we do with a lot of other leaders. It's a great question, and it's something which It's really hard to do, Gaurav, because as you can imagine, when you're on a roll, you're on a roll. Things are going well for you and just keep going on and on. My life partner is also my business partner. She's my check. So what I suggest to people to do is always have an accountability partner. Find someone who's a great friend, someone who's a colleague who you trust, but this friend or colleague should not be afraid to, sorry for the language, kick you hard in the ass when required. I found that I stay in touch with about 5 of my school friends. And these friends don't know me for now, whoever I am. They know me as Jaggu, who used to be with them in school. They don't hesitate to pull me down. And I think they keep me on the ground. Two ways of looking at it. So first, Gaurav, I'm going to maybe slightly off the track, but I think emotional intelligence is a great phrase. But if you really look at it, it's basically common sense. It's something our parents, grandparents, great grandfathers, ancestors have been talking about for ages. So it's about count to 10 before you react, is basically saying control yourself, don't lose it. So let's think about emotional intelligence only as common sense. And common sense will also dictate that if you're talking about the team you're with and how to be in touch with their emotions, doesn't it all link back to the meaning that you create for them, the purpose that you've created, and the vision that you've articulated? If you get those two things right, and the people are bought into your vision and they're on board with you, you will intuitively be in touch with them. There are certain kinds of people you should not listen to. I know it sounds like contradictory, but the one kind of person you should definitely not listen to or have in your life at all is the person who tells you you can't do this. Tumse nahi hoga. So if someone says that to you, you don't need to have them in your life. Now, it could be your brother, it could be your best friend. I would suggest just put them out and go somewhere else. They don't need to be in your network. So that's the one person not to listen to. What's the time to stop listening is in a moment of crisis. So if there's a fire in the house, I'm not going to call my team together and say, hey guys, there's a fire. What should we do about it? My first thing is going to do, let's get out of the door. Once we are all safe outside, then we'll figure out what to do next.